Welcome to this morning's evidence session of the Transport Committee. This is a one-off oral evidence session on car clubs and car sharing. We'll be looking at how alternatives to private car ownership are evolving for people who want the convenience of a car. We want to look at what might the environmental and social benefits be and what factors affect their provision and take-up, and what's the position of government and also the position and the role of local authorities. And in summary, are car clubs and car sharing a potential future additional alternative to the owning and use of private cars in order to facilitate modal shift? So could I ask the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Ali?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ali Clabburn. I am the founder of the UK's carpool network liftshare.com and chairman of Mobilityways, a social enterprise that helps decarbonise the commute.
Morning, everyone. My name's Sam Dewhurst. I'm head of sales and public sector at HireCar.
Good morning. I'm Richard Dilks. I'm chief executive of Coma UK. We are the national charity for the public benefits of shared transport.
Morning, I'm James Taylor, General Manager at Zipcar UK. We're the largest car club operator here in the UK.
Excellent, and welcome to you all. So could you in turn explain the main types of car or lift sharing, what they are and how they differ from each other? So I'll go again from left to right.
So our focus is on carpooling, which is when two or more people travel together to a similar or the same destination. There are lots of different types of carpooling. There's informal carpooling that 70% of adults do, where you just share with a friend or a colleague and you don't really think about it as being carpooling. And then there are more formal types of carpooling, normally organised through either employers or events who help their staff or communities to share cars to get to that site for a number of reasons, whether that's to solve parking problems, to increase recruitment, many reasons. So it's basically two people sharing a car to get somewhere. It's different from ride sharing, as in taxi sharing, because there's no profit can be made from it. You can only split the cost, and you don't need a car to carpool. You can either be a driver, a passenger, or you can take it in turns.
Great stuff. HireCar, we're the only provider of all modes of car sharing on our platform. So we cover car clubs, so our own vehicles on the side of the road in different local authorities where people can rent by the hour. And then we offer peer-to-peer car sharing, which the easiest way to explain it for everyone here is the Airbnb for cars. So you've got a car sat on your driveway that you're not using Monday to Friday. You can rent it out to your local community to be able to rent, or anyone on the HireCar platform, and you keep all the revenue from that. And then we also do services for corporate car sharing. So this is around mainly local authorities, NHS trusts, or operating a pool car sharing scheme, which can also be shared with the public when the vehicles are underutilised. And that's all around sort of reducing grey fleet mileage, which is people using their own personal vehicles for work mileage. And that's a big issue we try and solve, really.
Just to add to that, the small but important number of very small schemes the UK has of community-based car sharing schemes. These are schemes which have just a handful of cars, usually in single digits, are typically in rural, semi-rural areas, typically reliant on volunteer time and often are charities or social enterprises by structure. And the car club is the most established form of car sharing in this country. We've been researching it for 15 years plus now. Peer-to-peer has come along more latterly, but we think it's important to understand and get the most out of all forms of this, and to understand how important it is to integrate them with each other and not treat them in silos.
We have two forms of car sharing at Zipcar. So we have the kind of traditional back to base, probably the more common model that's been around for longer here in the UK. So that's a kind of dedicated parking bay on the streets where you pick up and return the vehicle to the same location. We also have free floating, which we call our flex model, and that's where vehicles can be picked up and dropped off anywhere within an agreed area. So that's more akin to maybe the European model. So we have that, and they're probably the two main models of car sharing. There also is return to area, which I think probably less common, but again, kind of a bit of a hybrid of the two, where rather than bring it back to a dedicated space, you bring it back to maybe a number of streets, so kind of defined area in that respect.
Okay, and for each of you, unless somebody says the same as what you were going to say, but in headline terms, what are the key benefits of car sharing in its various forms? That was James.
I think there are a number of ones really, and I think it's what we see is from our surveys with members is when they join, they change their travel behaviour. So when you own a private car, you default in most cases to using that car. You've sunk those costs in the car, you're not seeing the true cost of that trip. When you switch to car sharing, the cost of the trip is shown at the point of purchase. So you can see what that trip is costing you. And that helps people make different decisions, the kind of informed decisions. So they may choose to take a car share because they've got heavy luggage to transport and it's a convenient trip. They might say, actually, that's too expensive, I'm going to take a bus, I'm going to walk, I'm going to cycle. And we see that real shift of modal shift. So more people walking, cycling, using public transport and using car sharing for those ad hoc trips where a car is needed. I think something like 77% of car share members in the UK drive less than 5 times a year in car sharing. So they are, ad hoc car users, but it's a really vital service that we have a vehicle there for those trips when they need it. If you think about a private car, that probably sits underutilised 95% of the time. So that all that space that those cars are taking up kind of can be replaced by moving to car sharing. And again, we see that as a key benefit that kind of remove private cars from the road. So again, it's from the survey, and I'm sure Richard will give more detail, but when members join, they give up, so they're selling their private car or deferring purchase of a private car. So I think there's two kind of key benefits there.
Sorry, can I just... your other offer is vans as well. Is that just coincidental part of the business? Does that have a policy advantage, do you think, a wider benefit?
I think it does something just for businesses. So again, it's a large part of our offering to SMEs, startups, and like Sam had said, to local authorities and councils. And it has a key role to play. It's the same kind of model, rather than having lots of businesses with individual vans, kind of a number of businesses that use one vans. And it also has an impact on consumers as well. People kind of moving house, renters, that kind of thing. So it kind of serves all those purposes, and it's about having the choice of options so that we have the right vehicle for a member when they need it.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you. So benefits is something we research in depth. I won't regurgitate all of that here, but I'll try and give you some highlights. I think there's a key one around equity and access on a social economic basis to a vehicle here. We survey thousands of car club users each year and get data from all the operators each year and compile that into a report. And the most recent of that found that 50% of users would not have been able to make their trip without using that car club car. So these are trips typically which are hard or impossible to make by public transport and active travel. But there is a very strong link with public transport and active travel also. So we have found consistently, every year we've done this research, which goes back more than 15 years now, that car club users are very substantial public transport and active travel users, far above any national average or regional average when we've looked at it on that basis, or city average, or nation and region average in terms of Scotland, Wales, etc. So it doesn't matter how you slice that around, the same basic point is there, which I think is a really important one to understand. It filters into car sharing operations commercial tests for areas. The sorts of things they look at are: what is the state of public transport provision, what is the state of active travel infrastructure, what is the percentage of private car ownership per household. Those are all key metrics they look at for a reason, because they go straight to how users behave. In terms of other benefits, cost savings to users is important. That always comes up as a significant factor for people. If you're making that sort of occasional use of it, as most people do, as James cited, clearly that is a massive saving financially, almost certainly to you, versus buying or leasing your own car. That increases still further if it's an EV. They are in that sense even better value to get your hands on via car sharing. The reduction in ownership point James has already made. Us just point to reduction in mileage. So we've found this typically. So that this, I think, is a really important finding if we look to the country's performance on net zero, where every piece of modelling available shows that you need to reduce car mileage as well as transition to zero tailpipe. Simply transitioning to zero tailpipe, but without mode shift and without mileage reduction, doesn't get you the numbers. So Car Club plays an important part in that. And I think there's something important about choice here as well. That some people have choices in their lives. That's the general basis on which we people interact in consumer markets. And this range of options represented here at this table in this session gives people a really important set of options alongside public transport, active travel, owning their own bike perhaps, which is common in the bike share world, that I think is an understood, under-prioritised, almost secret weapon, if you like, of transport's journey to decarbonise, give people access to sustainable modes at low cost.
Is there any bleeding between use of car clubs and use of cabs? Or are they for completely different journeys?
No, it's a good question. We do look at that. It's a two-way street on that one also. So taxis got quite a high replacement factor by car club trips. 24% of trips would have been by taxi if they hadn't been by car club. But on the other hand, car club users do use taxi quite a lot. So that is another tool in the box for them, I think it's fair to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Richard covered a lot there. He's got all the stats. But one thing I don't know if you did mention is the reduction of vehicles on the road. So how many exactly vehicles does a car club vehicle?
Yeah, no, sorry. Let's throw that in. It's a great idea. So 27 cars is the national average. 31 cars in London. That's to say private cars per car club car displaced.
So huge benefit in regards to congestion and obviously air quality. Obviously, we are trying to increase the number of hybrids and electric vehicles that are on the car club. We'll probably go into the hardships of introducing electric vehicles into car clubs a bit later. But obviously, we've got your emission reduction there. Mm-hmm. What I will touch on more is around corporate car sharing, which we're sort of a big advocate of, especially in the NHS. We do a lot of work there. Is more about reducing grey fleet mileage. So the average grey fleet vehicle is roughly around 8 years old and about 157 grams of CO2 per kilometre. Where corporate car sharing comes into it is you can introduce a fleet of electric pool vehicles or hybrid pool vehicles that staff can use, that they don't have the cost of using their own vehicle and the emissions of using their own vehicle, because you can't tell staff what vehicle to drive, but you can implement policy for them to use pool vehicles and use a system like we provide. You can actually save the local authority or trust a lot of money, or any organisation a lot of money, rather than paying mileage reimbursements. So for the NHS, that's 59p a mile at the moment. You can run an electric pool car with our platform at around 32, 33p a mile. So that's a significant saving, and sort of one trust we work with across Norfolk and Suffolk saved around £60,000 in year one and around 20 tonnes of CO2 just from using our platform, introducing a new sort of way of sharing vehicles. So, and that also encourages sort of reduction in taxis and reduction in rental vehicles, which often aren't electric, because you're sort of sharing the fleet between departments. So NHS Trust local authorities who we mainly work with, the very work in silo. You've got vehicles between different teams which aren't shared. So HR probably won't share IT's team. With clinical staff probably won't share corporate staff vehicles. And it's just the cost and the emissions is sort of crazy. So when you introduce corporate car sharing, you've got a huge reduction in costs and CO2. So yeah, that probably covers a different side of what James and sort of Richard have gone into.
Interesting. Ali, and then Scott wants to come in.
So for carpooling, there are many benefits, shown, I guess, by the fact that if there wasn't carpooling, there'd be 30% more traffic on the road today. So it's really, really important, and it's very under considered. For individuals, they save money. You basically split the cost between two of you. Our average member saves £1,000 a year by sharing their commute. That's a lot of money. It's like having a big pay rise. You're clearly reducing emissions. The average member saves about a tonne of CO2, just under a tonne of CO2 a year, about 10% of their total emissions, again, just by carpooling. It improves access. A lot of our clients set up lift share schemes for their staff to help improve access into sites where they've got poor public transport services. It helps reduce exclusion, it helps reduce loneliness. If you ever share a car with someone, you find you chat a lot more than you do when you're sat on your own. And you save time compared to many of the other options. It's typically door to door, so we have a lot of members use it for accessibility issues. A lot of people with disabilities can use it to get door to door. It's basically it is well used because it has many benefits for businesses. Businesses save a lot of money on parking, on staff absenteeism by people coming in on time. They save money. They reduce their emissions. They can track how much their emissions are doing. A big reason right now is improving recruitment and retention. Lots of companies are struggling to recruit staff, particularly since the pandemic, and by having a carpooling scheme, they can help get many more people into their sites. For governments, it supports growth. It reduces congestion. It provides access. It ticks many of the policy boxes, but yet there are no policies to support it. So it's a win-win. It works well in rural areas as well as urban areas. More people typically do carpool in rural areas because of the lack of other options, but it works just as well in urban areas. We have as many members in urban areas as we do in rural. It's low cost, it's high impact, and it can be done tomorrow. There are empty seats in every car on every road tomorrow, or today even, that could be better used with the right policies and support.
Thank you. Scott, you had a question of Sam.
Yes, Sam, thanks for introducing this concept to me of grey mileage. It's interesting. So I think if I understand rightly, you're saying in that example, the NHS, they have a car which people share. And I understand the point made about the worker's car may be older and all those other issues. But the reality is that the worker may well be bringing their car to work only for it to sit in the car park all day and then use a car which might not otherwise have been manufactured. So if we're taking a look at this in a round, in terms of the carbon footprint, etc., is it not better to use the grey miles than buy and get that new car manufactured?
Yeah, so you say that. So we actually have got case study information on Royal Free NHS Trust in Enfield, and what we're seeing is a lot more their staff turn into a one-car household. Their partner might take their car to work, take their children to school, and they're using public transport or walking, active travel to then. They've booked a pool car in advance. They know that pool car is going to be there. They don't have to go and pick up a key. It's all keyless access. They're going to site, picking up that vehicle. But what we also do have is a lot of these NHS Trust local authorities have multiple sites. So up in East Lothian in Scotland, they've got one central site and a lot of sort of market towns where a lot of their staff live. They've placed pool vehicles in their market towns so staff can walk to a local community centre where the vehicle might be stationed and then access that vehicle and go and do their visits or whatever they're doing rather than driving into a centre. So yeah, to take your point, and it's probably not the case that everyone uses active travel or public transport to go and access a pool car, but yeah, we do try and actively encourage locations of where staff high grey fleet mileage is. So moving vehicles around where they might not traditionally be at different sites where your staff actually live, so they can use them different transport methods to access that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for outer London, my borough, a lot of staff commute from all over by public transport, but need pool vehicle to do their site visits more locally, and it makes a lot of sense. Sorry, yes, James.
Yeah, I think the other point to make on kind of business use and NHS use is where it works really well is where it's dedicated to the NHS Trust or local council for Monday to Friday, and then the weekend those vehicles are made available for the public. So, it tends to be car sharing is predominantly leisure, but we have a business side of it, so kind of raising that utilisation midweek, making vehicles available for public, and then you're having that broader benefit that those public using it are also then giving up their private cars as well.
I think what's important to say though is James, they offer a slightly different model, but we don't have to provide cars, and I don't know if Zipcar just provide technology only. They can use the existing assets the trust or council or organisation already have and fit the technology to be able to share with staff and with the public, and all insurances and all that are covered. So you don't always have to provide an asset which is more expensive than usually the public sector can get themselves.
An answer. Quite a few answers. Okay, thank you. Steph.
Thank you. We've heard a bit about the behaviours of the typical users, but who are they? Are they all smartphone-toting millennials, or what sort of demographics are doing this stuff? And how much of it is happening?
So how much of it is happening? We measure this twice a year, so the March 2025 stats are our latest, 883,594 total users. So that is the total number of people who are registered with a car club. That is not including peer-to-peer, that is not including Ali and colleagues' world of lift sharing. Of those, 328,539 have used it in the last year. So you have people who carry memberships along on a I might need it basis there, clearly, and Zipcar have some categories of free membership, which will explain part of that also. That's substantial growth, so we are up 58.9% in usership in the last 5 years, but we are a long way off the best-in-class countries in the world on this. So if we look at, probably instance, Germany and Belgium and Switzerland all come to mind. We have about 6,000 vehicles in the car club fleet across the country here. That's cars and vans, majority being cars, but Germany has 43,000. Germany's population is a bit higher, but it's nothing like that much higher. So that gives some sense of the scale. Who are they? It's actually very evenly distributed. We measured this, we tracked this as well, across the income wheel. So it's well spread across incomes, and we can supply more detail on the specific segments around that. It's also, I always think, quite surprisingly in a way, well spread across the age wheel. Peters off by the time you get to about 65 plus, but up till then, it will vary what age restriction might be in place, typically 21, sometimes a little higher. So, from there on upwards.
And if anyone's got anything else to add on those questions, that would be welcome. But I suppose the other thing I wanted to ask is there any disparity in terms of geography? Is this just a city thing? Is that changing?
Shall I start on that and then
I'll just put it on the carpooling one for the first question.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
So within the lift share network, there are 750,000 members. Obviously not as many as the 3 million people who carpool to work, but a significant number, going up by about 3,000 or 4,000 a month. So it is a large and ever-growing group of people. They are from a wide range of, or they do it for a wide range of reasons, mostly for commuting, but also going to football matches, events, one-off trips at weekends. Yeah. They are pretty much exactly 50-50 male-female. They are typically working age because they're typically commuting, but they use it from 18. You can't use a lift share below 18, up to, again, a similar 65 plus. Typical reasons for doing it are financial, although they typically join for financial reasons, then keep doing it for social reasons. They find sharing is much more fun, much less stressful. You can sleep every other day if you're sharing a car. It's a really good thing. Who don't use it are typically policymakers. Policymakers typically train, walk, cycle in cities and are not the 68% of people who do carpool regularly. So our challenge is often persuading people who wouldn't normally use it themselves to think that this is actually something that is very popular out there and could be much more popular.
If they're policymakers, maybe they don't want to be lobbied in the car.
Quite possibly, although I don't know if you saw the news last week, but there are a couple of quite senior people were lobbying each other. So the other thing to say is that small changes in occupancy levels make a massive difference. When you think that 3 million people carpool to work and 1 million people go by train and 2 million people by bus, more people carpool than use the other modes, and yet, therefore, small change in occupancy can have a massive change in traffic. When we saw the pandemic and people were told not to carpool, we saw a 4 to 5% drop overnight in occupancy levels, and that has stayed.
Sorry, for the record, 4 to 5, right? Okay.
In overall occupancy levels, on the lift share network, we saw an 86% reduction in new people sharing during that time, and it is still way below where it was pre-pandemic, because there's been no, unlike with buses, there's been no campaign to get people back into sharing cars.
And that probably answers my other question, which is that 3,000 to 4,000 monthly user growth, that inflection, has that been recent? Has that been sustained by the pandemic, or is that a
pre-pandemic? It was higher,
right?
Probably a third higher than it is now.
The rate of growth.
The rate of growth, but also at that time there were local authorities all over the country. A lot of local authorities had lift share schemes. All that funding has gone. Yeah. The number of local authorities supporting lift sharing is about a quarter of what it was 10 years ago.
Right.
The number of employers with lift share schemes has flatlined. It's going up, but it's mostly the bigger ones that are doing it because of all the reasons that do it. But there's very little awareness or encouragement. Unlike we talk about internationally, in France they are investing 150 million euros a year into carpooling. They now in Italy have a national carpooling plan. In Holland they have a national carpooling plan. Here we have nothing similar.
And back to the geography question.
Yes.
I'm interested in each of your use cases for this because the models are different. Richard?
I'll try to give an overview if I might briefly. It is by volume of user, predominantly an urban animal, car sharing, but I'm defining urban quite broadly there, so certainly including suburban and peri-urban. There are really important opportunities to have greater coverage in those areas that have a natural viability that currently are stymied by the fact that the sector has no policy support, no certainly financial support, and lots of policies set against it, in fact, as a sort of policy discrimination on top of no support, and is usually paying to operate to boot. So that's a lot of hurdles to clear before you can be thinking you might not be making a loss as an operator. So we could be having more. It's an easy first step, I think, to get more coverage in those sorts of areas. But also important on urban to say it is not very central urban that works very well. Because you have too short journeys that are too readily made by other modes that are less faff and less cost than taking a car club car. So the percentage of journeys, James, I'm sure will be able to come in across the platforms that are very short is always very low because it just doesn't stack up for users to use it that way. You then telescope out, if you like, into more rural areas. This is where we have typically that sort of longer tail, because there's a very small number of big operators, too small in my view, in the country. You have this longer tail of small operations. They play a really vital role. They have a very tough time. The odds are set against them also. And they've also had an insurance crisis which has bedeviled that sector for the last half decade plus, which has wreaked havoc with it, and there's a massive chilling effect upon it. Things have improved a little on that, but it's still in a very bad way. That's what we've got now. I think it's finally important to look again across the water, etc. Other areas have coverage that's pretty well distributed across different density types. It will always be a struggle in the very least densely populated parts of any country, and the UK has quite a few of those. Actually, we're quite concentrated, but also very rural at the same time. Other places are more evenly spread, which is easier, but nonetheless there's viability to be had there in lots of different scenarios, only some of which we're getting at the moment.
Thank you. Richard, James, wrong label. Viability, insurance crisis, how's it affecting you?
So from a viability piece, we currently just operate in London. So we're in pretty much every London borough, I think, apart from 2. And part of that, I suppose, linked to what Richard said earlier, London's very good in terms of the network of other options, so the public transport infrastructure, cycling, walking, and that's where car sharing works. It's got a good density of people, particularly for our free-floating model. You need that density to kind of, people will rent the car and move it around.
The model essentially doesn't really work in rural areas.
I think our model doesn't. It's very much a city model. I think, as Rich said, there are other things that can work in rural. But the key thing to remember is you need those alternatives. If you are switching from a private car use to using the same number of trips in a shared car, that would be more expensive from a car club perspective. You need to be kind of changing your habits and using car now and again, a shared car, and then using other modes alongside that. So I guess that's where it becomes a bit more challenging from the traditional car club model. Potentially other models, peer-to-peer, carpooling works better in those rural settings, but certainly what we do is much more city-based.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, so we only operate our own car club vehicles inside of London. Peer-to-peer is UK-wide.
Where everyone chooses.
Where everyone ever chooses. Main sort of spikes, so sort of Birmingham, Bristol, Manchester, Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Right.
So major cities.
Yeah.
We do have some impact rurally. We have recently got some funding from different local authorities in regards to running rural car clubs. But again, that we wouldn't choose to operate there if we didn't have the funding. It wouldn't be commercially viable to be able to do that. You're sort of trying to, the whole plan around rural car clubs is to get the funding, to get the sort of marketing behind it, to then make it self-sustaining, because we won't, so over a couple of years, get a user base, get people using it, and then become self-sustaining without funding. So that's the main thing we're trying to do around rural car clubs, but there's not a huge amount of funding to go and do rural car clubs absolutely everywhere. Peer-to-peer is much easier to do across the country because we don't actually go and have to do tech installs. We don't have to install our technology. We can just do key handover, similar to sort of a lockbox on an Airbnb you might hire wherever. So yeah, peer-to-peer is key, and then we don't have to invest in the assets. There's really no holding costs for us and sort of no holding costs for the user. So to encourage it across the country, outside of sort of main city hubs, peer-to-peer probably the more way to go, I'd say. People might disagree, but I'd say it's probably easier for an operator to operate peer-to-peer sort of outside that.
Got it, thank you. And Ali, I'm guessing there's a difference between journey source and destination, because you might have lots of people going to some very random place if there's an event on there, but what's the geographic distribution like in your business?
So there are some local authorities that have been supported for a long time, like Devon, where they have 10,000 members, they have regular sharers every day, it works really well. They have a tiny budget to promote it each year, but it's kind of been there for a long time and it's still going well. There are areas like Warwickshire where they have lots of employer engagement, so lots of the big employers there, the car manufacturers, etc., have done a good job of promoting it, and they've got thousands of people sharing every day. Scotland was doing very well pre-pandemic. It's dropped off a bit, but it was doing really well. It's generally wherever it's promoted, and so that either relies on anyone who hears about us through our national network, or through going to events, or through mostly employers or local authorities. We're working with a lot of NHS trusts now. One of the most exciting projects we're doing is up at Necker, where they are actually using BSIP funding to use some other tech that our Mobilityways company does to look at all the bus options of going to the big employers there. And on the back of that, it's highlighting the huge potential for lift sharing as well. So it hopefully will lead to people taking note that there's a huge potential for lift sharing to support the bus network up there, that could be replicated elsewhere.
Thank you. If I could just add, so one good bit of policy is Section 106 for new developments. So Section 106 is around, it's lots of different things, I'm pretty sure, in regards to like parks and travel, and that is sort of put on developers by local authorities to provide sort of different transport options. So a lot of new developments now under Section 106 are required to reply, if the local authority puts it upon them, to required to sort of supply a car club, either memberships or actual vehicles and operation of a car club for a new development. So that is something that's seen a lot more rurally, seeing new car club vehicles pop up sort of outside your major hubs, but it's all about the local authority sort of imposing that Section 106 on the developer, and then sort of marketing that out to the sort of residents. So that is been quite a good successful thing for us from policy.
Thank you.
So, Ali, could I just come back? I just want to clarify what you mentioned, and I was only got half of what you're saying about the link with bus networks, because we, as you know, did a report on buses connecting communities, and we covered briefly demand responsive transport. Now, for people who can drive, or for carers who can drive of people who can't, is there a sort of element of potential crossover with your offer and DRT, or can it be a form of DRT?
Yes, it absolutely can. With all these things, it's about the critical mass of people going from A to B at the same time. If rather than looking at specific modes, you look at vehicles and people, what is the most efficient way to get people from this village into this hospital, or from this town into here, or at what time? So one project we were doing just recently at a hospital in a rural area, we analysed all of the staff, saying how they can currently travel. We asked them how they would like to travel. That came back basically showing that only 3% were coming by bus, 25% could come by bus. But the reason they could only come by bus at that time of day was because the buses didn't come in early enough for the staff. So now they're putting in earlier buses on the back of the data we're doing, but they're also introducing lift share bays, promoting car sharing, and all of that will help the buses get in and out of the hospital because they've got massive congestion. So the two work really closely together, and it's important that they're not seen as competing, because buses need to go on routes that have high levels of population. Carpooling can fill up all the gaps and get people to those bus networks too.
I think we're thinking about rural areas where even subsidised buses are not viable because the density of population is so low.
Yes, I think when we were looking at Devon, The average cost of a subsidised trip for them promoting carpooling was about 2p. For buses was £15.
Thank you.
I just add something there, if I might. The role of employment in all this, I think, is potentially huge, and we, various of us have touched on that from a few different angles. There are a number of examples of DRT schemes which have come about through starting as employee shuttles, which in turn have come about as employers desperately try to recruit. Ali touched on this point earlier, and often fail to do so, or recruit but can't retain because transport options are so poor to a work site. And in rural areas this particularly bites down, or very edge of urban areas, the edge of suburban areas, this bites down. There's a real opportunity here to take a holistic approach from government, but also from employers, to look across all these different options.
Right, okay, thank you. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I think this next question's been anticipated because you've spoken to us already about international comparisons and the UK's apparently poor performance. What other countries are doing it better? How does the UK compare in objective terms? Because I think we've heard about some of the better comparators already, but are there other similarly sized nations that are also struggling? And could you tell us a bit more about why you think the UK underperforms some of those markets? Is it primarily because of policy and regulation, or is it because of density of population or cultural factors?
If you look objectively at us, we're mid-table. If you try and do a comparison of population size, I think we're mid-table really despite the policy set we've got, because we've got no supportive policy and we've got quite a few harmful policies. I think it's also fair to say that most of those comparator countries don't have a policy situation that's as unfavourable as that. They have fewer barriers, and in many cases they have enablers. So the best-in-class performers, I instanced already, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, perhaps add Norway to that list. They all have active policy plans with relevant policies that aren't just about car sharing, lift sharing, but are about other things that relate to them, such as cost and availability of private car parking, for example, that are, got some teeth and have got some funding and actively pursued, alongside a public transport and active travel support programme, which is critical to understand. It's hopeless to just do something for car lift sharing on its own in a silo. Our view is that I think it's fair to say we're at something of an all-time low, to be honest, in terms of central government's attentiveness to this area. It's never been great in the time of Coma UK's existence, which is a quarter of a century now, or my time in this role, 6 years. But we have no policy. It's nowhere in any DFT documentation now. There was a toolkit on lift sharing and a toolkit on car clubs. Both were summarily withdrawn a couple of months ago with no reason given. There is no official in the department working on these areas at all. It is not part of any minister's remit. It is extremely difficult for us as the national organisation to get a meeting with DFT on this currently. We have just got one, but we've been many, many months in the waiting. So there is an excessive lack of focus on here, and it's a shame, I think, in many ways, because it has material impacts that we can see in our evidence all the time, which of course then translates into impacts in people's lives. And there are opportunities here which a lot of which don't cost anything, some of which would, but there's a sort of starter menu of things which I think are relatively simple to get going on, and yet those opportunities aren't being seized. So we're mid-table, but by more by dint of efforts against the system than facilitation by it.
And I think because of that lack of policy, you get a very fragmented provision. So even
we're going to come on to policy, but thank you. Yeah, okay. Sorry, Lawrence.
No, thank you. And could I just check, Mr. Dilks, when you said there's no officials currently working on this policy area, is it fair to assume that was the case in the past, that it's fallen away?
The best I've had in my time has been a portion of someone, if you see what I mean. So it's one part of of their role, and those individuals have always done their absolute best, to engage with us. But the last of those went in the latest DfT restructure. That role wasn't replaced. That passed to their boss. That person then left, and that role wasn't replaced. I do have a meeting with an official whose job it isn't in a few weeks' time in the diary. But and I'm sure they'll do their best as well. But the problem is, it's not part of any serious focus from the department.
Can I just cover it from the carpooling angle? So when looking at internationally, we were ahead of the rest of the pack, ahead of the world for probably 10 years. France, 2009 onwards, started growing. The Prime Minister, President, took great interest in BlaBlaCar, which is a French national scheme, taking them out to the White House as their darling of French innovation. And since then, the attention on carpooling in France has been significant, ramping up in recent years. In 2022, they launched a national carpooling plan. In 2019, they'd changed their legislation to allow employers to give financial rewards to staff who travel sustainably. The same happened in France, same happened in Italy, same has happened in Holland and in other countries around the world. Whereas at the moment in this country, you can't subsidise staff travel at all. The result in France is they now have a clear goal to triple carpooling levels by 2027. In Italy, they now have to measure carpooling levels, same in Holland. So they have a whole framework that's been really introduced only in the last 5 or 6 years, but the impact on that sector, in France they've gone from like 3 main operators, they've got about 30 now. The growth in the sector has been huge, the investment into it's been significant, and they are taking a world lead, which is frustrating because we were ahead. But we've had no policies to support us here, and therefore the growth hasn't come.
That 10-year period that you mentioned, was that in the 2000s up to around...
That was 2000 to 2010, well, 1998 to 2010. We had the first online carpool scheme in the world. We had the largest carpooling schemes. Heathrow had the largest carpooling scheme in the world, followed by another motor manufacturer. Now there are other bigger schemes, and lots of local authorities in other countries actively engaging with it. A key thing is we don't define carpooling here. It's not a mode of transport. You've got public transport and private transport. We talk about walking, cycling, bus, car, not walking, cycling, car on your own, sharing with someone. The sharing with someone, the passenger numbers in that is huge, and we don't talk about it in many policies, which is just a massive waste.
Or car sharing.
Yeah.
I would say a big thing around, especially peer-to-peer, is culture. Not everyone wants to share their car. We're a car-centric country. Not everyone... You might have a car sat on your drive for 5 days of the week. Doesn't mean you want some stranger on a platform to go and use it on a random Wednesday to take it where you probably don't know where to take it to. So a big education piece on that in regards to sort of our and the industry's marketing around sort of the benefits of car sharing, but obviously from local authorities, sort of central and local government would pay sort of massively to that. But yeah, it is a culture thing in the UK. People love their cars. It's their car. It's their pride and joy. They don't want some random person jumping in it whenever on a platform. So it's education around the benefits of what car sharing can offer them, the income to people sharing their car, but also the benefits of not actually owning a car and sharing someone else's. But again, a lot of it is culture, unfortunately, which sort of we need to try and change as an industry.
Just on that point, if you think about the car and how we use it, they are static 95% of the time. Yep. And when we use them, we only have one person in them. So they're like 99% inefficient. If you think how many electric cars there are already on the UK's network, you could just use that fleet now, and if they were all shared, as in lift sharing, as well as shared as in pooled, you wouldn't need the rest of the fleet.
That takes us on quite neatly to the next question, which is about decarbonisation. Would you say that the decarbonisation and electrification of the fleet is going to continue at the rate of progress that you've seen already? And I think something else we're interested in hearing about is whether you see any behaviour changes among the users. Do you see people preferring to use electric vehicles, or is there a preference for petrol?
You want to start on that, James?
Yep, yeah, sure. So we introduced our first electric vehicle back in 2018. We've now got just under a third of our fleet fully electric. And in that time, over 180,000 members have driven electric with us. So there's a real piece for car clubs around accessibility and equitable access, affordable access to EVs that I think we need to touch on. But I think you mentioned about do I think it's going to grow? I think at the moment, the costs of electrifying car clubs is very expensive. So I think some work that Como did, it costs the operators around over £6,000 more per year per car to operate an electric vehicle in a car club fleet. So part of that is that, unlike traditional fleet owners, we don't bring our vehicles back to a depot at the end of the day and have our infrastructure there. Our fleet is dispersed across cities. We don't own infrastructure, therefore we have to use public infrastructure. One of the key metrics for car clubs is downtime, so we want to keep that as low as possible so that vehicles are available for members to utilise. That means we use rapid or ultra-rapid infrastructure, which is the most expensive. And then you compare that on a cost per mile basis compared to petrol, it's actually more expensive than petrol, which is a scary place to be in when we kind of we made the moves to electrify on assuming that there'd be savings for us. There's also other policies that work against us. So part of the challenge that I think we find in the UK for car clubs is that we're always considered as a car, the same as a private car. We're not separate, even though, as we've shown, there are very different benefits from car clubs compared to private cars. An example of this is in London, where congestion charge, we are treated exactly the same as a private car. They're currently proposing to remove the 100% exemption and introduce a new 25% discount. We expect that to cost the sector around £1 million more per year on average if that change goes ahead. We can't simply pass those costs on to members. There is a kind of a ceiling that you can pay. If you start to raise your prices too much, then actually the economic benefits that we've talked about from switching from private car to car clubs are eroded, and it becomes less viable for them to do that. If we then have to absorb all those costs ourselves as a business, then it becomes commercially viable. So there's a real kind of tension here around we want to electrify a fleet, we want to move forward, but the costs and the barriers, I guess, that are put in place that are increasing those costs make that ever more difficult.
If I might try to decouple decarbonisation from EV here to an extent, by which I mean the very act of the very efficiency of car club brings substantial greenhouse gas emission reductions, coupled with the youth of the fleet and the private car displacement that we were referring to before. So we calculate this on an annual basis, and it adds up to substantial carbon emission particularly, but other greenhouse gas emission savings also. There was a very interesting piece of work City of Bremen did recently where they asked and answered the question, so what's the decarbonisation impact of having the car sharing fleet the city has, and what would be the extra positive impact, or is it a positive impact, if we turned it all over to EV overnight? And in fact, the bulk of the benefit comes from the act of car sharing and all its efficiencies. You do get additional GHG emission savings from replacing with EV, but they're minor compared to the major factor of sharing. So already it's a sector, and lift sharing we don't have detailed stats on, but I'm sure Ali does, that contributes very significantly to decarbonisation. Clearly, transition to tailpipe-free is a really important part of decarbonisation overall. The car club sector is miles ahead of the private fleet here, so it's on 30% of the fleet being EV. However, that is a reduction for the first time ever. That's down from 35% to 30%. And I'm afraid to say I think it's likely that on the current realities that will reduce further. The costs of operating, the excess cost of operating that James referred to, £6,200 roughly we calculated, is just too much. The car club margins don't support that sort of loss, so to speak, over a petrol or hybrid car. There are no diesel cars in the fleet anymore. A lot of that, you asked about consumer demand, so a lot of that does in fact come from reduced consumer demand, which seems to be a very mixed picture from all we can understand. So on the one hand, operators are reporting to us averaging out reduced consumer demand. In other words, you take the petrol or hybrid away and put an EV in, and you get lower utilisation. But in our user surveys, we see people giving very high satisfaction ratings to EVs in car clubs, and a greater percentage of them having sought them out than they make up of the fleet. So we extrapolate from that, but we haven't yet been able to dive into this. Is this about recharging? Because people also report to us that they loathe recharging car club cars. It's a 50 percentage point drop in satisfaction from using the thing to recharging it, 80 down to 13. So is it that if they think they need or they do need to recharge it during hire, they will avoid it? If they don't, they're probably quite happy, maybe even more than happy, more happier than they would have been to go and use it. Now we've hoped to go into that further, but it's a significant part of the £6,000 figure. The other part is the infrastructure point James already made about car clubs not having a driveway. And so they're charging typically at the most expensive rates. There's no facilitation here again from government broadly. There's no plan, there's no framework, there's no consideration for this is not just any old car. And there is also, I think, a couple of points of active discrimination that is important to note. So VAT is, of course, 5% on driveway, 20% at public charge points, so car clubs don't get any 5% charging. And on the London congestion charge point that James was making, of course, historically there's been this residence discount for cars in the zone, which of course does not apply to car club cars. So it's not just they're treated as cars, but in some instances they're treated worse than private cars. I think, just to close on from my bit of this, we have seen a bit of traction from government in this area. It's important to recognise. So the zero emission vehicle mandate, which relatively few countries have one at all, it does have a favouritism for car clubs in there. It's worth more for car manufacturers to supply EVs to car clubs than it is to supply to, there's one other niche, if you like, case, but than it is to supply generally. That's great theoretical policy, and we're really glad it's there. It's made absolutely no positive impact out on the ground with car clubs as of yet anyway. I think the car club fleet is just too small and it's so efficient, it's so tiny for the number of people it serves, and also there's no direct link between car makers and car clubs. They don't get the cars direct from Toyota, Volkswagen, whoever. Nonetheless, at least it's there, and maybe we can get better action out of government on trying to make sure this lands. And they have changed the exclusion that used to be there on EV charging for public funding of EV charging infrastructure. So it used to be explicit that this could not be used for car clubs, which makes absolutely no logical sense whatsoever, but that was the case based around EU state aid fears. We did manage to get that turned around probably about 2.5 years ago, something like that. That has had some positive impact. We do now have authorities who've put bids into Levi and AUX, to funds, and are going to use those for car clubs. It's a trickle rather than the flood, though, and really, logically, to our mindset and based on all evidence, you'd have government approach this on a fleet basis and think about how can we get the most decarbonisation and access bang for buck out of all of this. And I think if you look at it that way, then car sharing, lift sharing and their relationship with EVs leaps up the agenda. But currently it's just stuck there on the margins.
Okay, Lawrence, thank you for that. Lawrence, you wanted to... Sorry, Lawrence, you're done. Yeah, okay, thank you. Scott wanted to pick up a couple of points from earlier, and Steph also wanted to pick up on something.
Thanks, Chair. I've been called worse, I think. So, Ali, just reminding a bit, you were talking about the targets in France for tripling, I think, car sharing. Carpooling, sorry, let me get my terminology correct. So that's a great target, but of course, I'm just wanting reassurance, I guess. I guess they could meet that target by dragging people out of buses and putting them in cars or dragging them with the footpaths. Is it part of a wider policy to reduce car use, car miles, and also hopefully increase public transport use?
In France, yes, definitely. And the research we've done here over the years, a big bit of work was done up in Scotland, looking at the impact of carpooling on local bus services. Some people do shift from bus services to carpooling, but only when the bus services are really inconvenient, so it takes them more than twice the time it takes them to drive. But also you get people going back the other way, so people who carpool into work then use the bus network during the day.
You know, just want reassurance on that point. I guess that was the case. And Richard, you spoke about the lack of support in DFT, as you explained, around somebody being responsible. How does it look in individual local authorities? Because I guess some local authorities must be leading on this and allocating resource to it, whilst, as you explained, the DFTs perhaps not.
Yes, that is true. It's very, very mixed, which of course does go back to the DFT point James touched on this earlier. Inevitably, if you don't have something from the centre that's trying to have coherence, you have a bottom-up reality for local areas, and so there's a postcode lottery aspect there, and you see areas that, because they've got sensible policies, they've got some officials working on it, they actually want to have more of this stuff. They do have more of this stuff, which in a way is unfair, because why should people in comparable places have less of it, simply because for whatever reasons their authorities, politicians, etc., less interested in it. But we do see this, yes. I think that question brings another point to mind, I think, which is that we've seen a rise in interest and performance from local authorities generally in the last few years, but it is very uneven. It's typically concentrated around either the big metro areas, although they're not universal on this. London.
Sorry, can we? We're going to come back to local authorities because there's a number of questions that have occurred to us. Steph, you wanted a quick.
Very
clarification.
tiny clarification. You talked about when you got the government to take us out of the state aid barrier to charge point usage by car clubs. You said we saw a small trickle uplift in local authorities applying to or for something, and I missed what it was that they were applying.
Yes, so that's applying for particularly Levi local electric vehicle infrastructure.
Levi infrastructure, got it, thank you. Perfect.
Thank you. Right, Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. You've already made some good points, some interesting points about whether car sharing reduces the number of vehicles on the road. So I'm sort of going to invite you to expand on any of those, but also to look at the flip side of that. So there have been some concerns from the London Assembly Transport Committee that car clubs might have the potential to increase the amount that people are using cars and possibly increase congestion or perhaps erode the amount that people are using public transport or active travel. So my mind is very open, but perhaps be good to hear from you in turn on both of those points, both the potential for reducing the number of vehicles on the road and maybe the opposite. Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. We don't see that in terms of our data. There may be some people that will take a car club for a short trip that could have been done by another mode of transport, but overall, if you look at the average trip length, they are longer trips, and all the research that we've had from our members to say, how has this changed? They tell us that they're walking, cycling, using public transport more. So I think you have to look at it as a holistic view. I think part of it is how we price it. So, we price it to be more expensive than public transport, kind of trying to be slightly cheaper than taxis. So you're in that kind of sweet spot that price plays a role. And that's the bit that we think kind of changes the behaviour, that actually, if I'm just taking this for very short trips, it's very expensive, and I'd be better using other modes of transport.
I think I'd like to echo what James said there. Obviously, we do hourly bookings for car club vehicles. They're way more expensive than booking a taxi, return journeys and public transport. So, yeah, I still would say it reduces the number of vehicles sort of on the road. We take a reason for booking, for every single booking, and when we sort of analyse that data, it's usually longer trips, sort of going to visit family, moving something from IKEA or something like that, especially when using vans. So it's usually longer bookings which are more frequent on our platform, and again, like James said, when we manage them, when we sort of analyse the mileage data and sort of trip data, it's usually longer journeys which would probably be more useful in a car than sort of public transport or active travel. So yeah, I'd sort of echo what James said.
Can I add on, focusing specifically on London? If you look at when the congestion charge first came in, clearly there was a big surge in the number of people using public transport. What also happened, which wasn't reported but is in the data, was a big surge in the number of people starting to carpool. Actually, more people started to carpool than shifted across to the bus, and yet no one paid any attention. So the traffic reduction was in a large part due to the buses, but was also due to carpooling. If there had been a campaign at the same time to encourage more carpooling in the areas, particularly the radial areas around the city where buses don't typically travel, that increase could have been much more substantial. And yet every time the congestion charge has changed since then, again, carpooling has not been mentioned as an option for the people who can't have a decent bus route.
Also, there's a point there on kind of travel patterns. So we have, I think I mentioned at the start, our free floating model, which is kind of, you pick up and drop off anywhere. We tend to see a lot more radial trips. So the kind of public transport infrastructure in London is very much out to in. So we kind of, again, we're filling a gap where those trips aren't, those trips aren't served by other modes of transport. So I think it's difficult to say this is right and that's wrong. I think you've got to look at the whole thing holistically.
Just to add on this, we've researched this for, as I said before, more than 15 years and consistently found that the relationship's a positive one. Those people are coming out of private car and into more occasional car use via Car Club and are thereby using public transport and active travel a lot more. To give some examples, 36% Car Club users using a bike at least once a week. National average for England is 12%. 55% using a train or tram each week, national average for England is 9%, 53% using the bus, national average for England is 21%, so some substantial gaps. I'm not aware the London Assembly Transport Committee hold that concern. TfL certainly do. I've had many an interaction with them on this point over the years. The London Assembly Transport Committee recently put out a report titled TfL's Stalling Car Clubs, which gets quite a lot across in one title, I thought, and has some good recommendations. It's a long-standing concern. It's a very understandable concern. It's one we deal with on a sort of probably every couple of weeks someone asks us this question, but I think we're very solid on the evidence. And I think also worth pointing internationally, loosely comparator organisations to ours that do somewhat similar research to us in other countries find very similar things.
Just to add on sort of the reduction in vehicles, so one particular London borough, because we told them that we reduce the number of vehicles on the road, which in turn will reduce the number of resident permits they get income from, said we're going to have to then increase the price of car club permits because we're then losing revenue from the lack of resident permits, which just makes it even more difficult to operate, unfortunately.
Possibly the same local authority is granting planning permission for blocks of flats without a space per flat, and is going to need those spaces. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. I mean, just to clarify in terms of what you said, I think we're both correct. Actually, it was TfL evident to the London Assembly Transport Committee expressing that view. So just to make sure that's cleared up for the record. But I think what you've all said very much speaks to the point that I think you made earlier, Richard, which is that all of these things in terms of car sharing, etc., shouldn't be looked at in isolation. It does need to be related to your overall policy goals and policy levers. And hopefully, that we're eagerly anticipating as a committee a government's integrated transport strategy, and hopefully this is something that they will be thinking about as part of that. On to something, again, you've also touched on a little bit in terms of the extent to which by sharing cars and lifts, a user can save money. Could you just expand a little bit on that, and perhaps particularly what's the sort of sweet spot in terms of where it can become more cost effective for someone to use a car club than their own, and what's the evidence on that? Who'd like to go first on that one?
I've got some numbers, let me throw them in. So in terms of car club members, 34% of them said saving money was a reason for signing up. So it's a fairly chunky percentage, one of the main reasons. We have the problem cost that we referred to earlier about operating EVs, but interestingly from a user perspective, using an EV in car club, it's the almost exact same figure, but on the positive. So £5,600 was our averaged potential annual savings to someone using car club EV. Now within that there's some more detail which I can supply, but we looked at a range of scenarios, different mileage levels, all with London figures, and different costs of EV. So we looked at a new Tesla, we looked at a second-hand Renault Zoe. We tried to be as fair to it as we could. On 5 out of 6 of the scenarios, people are saving substantial amounts of money. Tipping points, we don't have precise numbers on that, but it is, if you're using, very roughly perhaps, car club more than 10 times a year is rare. We can say that much. 70% usually in our annual research are using it 5 times a year or less. Usually around 80% are using it 10 times a year or less. So I think that speaks to itself on the economics. As you go beyond that level of use, you start to reach a tipping point where running a private car, or at least a cheap private car, might be cheaper for you. But it's going to depend on a lot of other realities and what other options you have, etc.
Can I just ask, before we move away from the users and their motivation, for the different modes you're covering today, is there any evidence that that people use car clubs as a way to make an occasional journey that they would not have otherwise made, as opposed to you use public transport or whatever?
Yes, very much. 50% would not have been able to make their trip, is what we found at all. So it's a major enabler of, if you like, in that sense, new trips, but of course they're trips that are valuable to people because they've gone on and made them.
And on carpooling, it's about 12% of trips are made, but passenger trips are done by people who have no other access to a car. So the only way they can get there is through carpooling.
All right, thank you. Oh, sorry, Alex.
Could I just ask, presumably, if you're sharing a lift, there are some extra miles and time involved in going to pick up the extra passengers. Are there any stats that show if there's a kind of tipping point on that as to how many extra miles or how many extra minutes people are willing to add to their journey?
The reason people do anything is convenience is their top reason for choosing what they do, typically, often above cost. So you need to make it convenient. Employers benefit people at the other end by providing reserved parking spaces for car sharers so they can park their car when they get to the other end. But typically people will only go a few minutes out of their way for a short commute journey, whereas they're more willing to go maybe 10 minutes out of the way for a longer 100-mile plus journey. They'll also do it for the social side. So depending on who they're picking up, how well they get on with them, they're more or less likely to go out of the way to take them. And often, with carpooling for companies, it'll be people taking it in turns. So often someone will cycle to someone else's house, share a car with them, and the following day the person coming from behind them will pick them up en route. So there are all different sorts of ways of doing it.
Okay, Steph.
Thank you. We've heard about the insurance issue. I wondered if you could describe the impact it's had on each of your organisations, whether it's getting better and what government needs to do if it's still a problem. Should we start with Ali?
So we tackled this back in 1998 when we first set up because some insurance companies were telling people they couldn't carpool. So we got the British Insurance, BSI, whatever it was, to change their policy to enable basically all their members to allow carpooling as long as no profit was made.
Hang on, carpooling, even the 70% of adults who do it informally, how are they defining it?
Well, that it was written in that you basically couldn't take money from someone for having a lift. Yep. It was probably only about 5 or 10% of policies. All of those got changed back in about 2000 when that guidance came through, and it's only now for some employers where their staff carry particular items in their vehicles, whether they're medical or confidential, that they don't want people to get by car. But under your normal travel policy, you can carpool with someone as long as you don't make a profit.
Got it, thank you. Different for you, Sam, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so on sort of peer-to-peer and sort of car club, we've seen a 56% rise in the last 3 to 4 years of insurance prices. Our insurance is calculated, it's probably slightly different to Zipcar, that James probably go into more detail how they do it, is based on sort of vehicle insurance group, location of the vehicle, employment status, how many points you've got on your licence, all them sort of factors. Insurance providers are quite risk adverse. We're currently going through trying to find a new policy, and we've took it to many of different main brokers, and there's really little interest on trying to broker a better deal or any deal at all. Richard mentioned community car clubs. Majority of them are completely folded because there's no insurance. Insurance just aren't willing to provide insurance for community car clubs. It's easier for corporate car sharing because you can offer a fleet insurance policy, but again that has risen. So average 24-hour insurance price is £33.96. But that obviously varies. That obviously varies on who's driving the vehicle, points, and all the factors that I mentioned before. It's different in different areas. So certain areas of London are more expensive than areas of Manchester, Birmingham, as it would be traditional with traditional car insurance, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, if that price continues to sort of increase, it's just making everything more and more difficult to be able to operate, especially when we've got the holding costs of the vehicles as well. And then we also have off-hire insurance. So that's where, when the vehicle's not hired on that insurance policy, it's basically in case someone smashes into the vehicle as parked in the bay, that's also rising. So even when the vehicle's not being booked and we're not earning any revenue from it, we're still having to pay out. that is probably a slightly different model. So obviously Enterprise aren't here today, who offer a big car club sort of mainly outside of London. They self-insure because they're a multi-billion-dollar organisation who have the ability to be able to self-insure all their vehicles, and all their vehicles are owned. So as a smaller operator, we lease our vehicles or hire our vehicles, so we don't have the ability to self-insure. So we're sort of at the restrictions of the market, who just aren't flexible enough or do not want to explore the avenues of what we have to offer, really.
Thank you. Can I go to James and then back to you, Rich? Is that okay, James?
Yeah, so we're we're a bit more like Enterprise, so we're owned by Avis Budget Group, so we can self-insure as well. But across the board, we're seeing higher insurance costs as the kind of cost of vehicles, cost of parts increase. You know, a damage to a vehicle costs more to repair, so therefore the insurance costs go up. So it's even though we self-insure, it's an issue that we face.
I don't expect you'll be able to share any numbers, but are you able to comment on whether there's a disparity between the rate of increase of the cost internally for self-insurance compared to what you know about the market price inflation?
I wouldn't be able to say.
Right, okay. No, I understand. Okay. Richard, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really important issue. I think we've got two basic problems here. One is lack of cover. So the insurance sector has retreated from car sharing really notably in the last probably around 7 years now. And so we've had a number of the community schemes that Sam was referring to just fold because they cannot get renewal cover. There's also been a really big chilling effect of it's being more or less impossible to set up a new scheme because you can't get cover. So that's obviously extremely problematic, potentially fatal over time as schemes come up for renewal. And then the second problem area is cost, as people have already been relaying. So that's killed off a few more of the smaller schemes because, yes, they can get cover, but only at such an exorbitant cost that they can't possibly afford it, and so they fold for that reason. The cost point is also starting to, I think, stalk even the biggest operators, as James was saying, and certainly the sort of more, if you like, middle-scale ones, as Sam was reporting. And that just then adds to an overall rising cost through a whole range of factors, congestion charges mentioned by James, etc., EV charging infrastructure we've talked about already. So the cost picture on car sharing has deteriorated significantly over the last few years, and this is part of it. Incidentally, it's also seen off a couple of e-scooter trials because they are treated as motor vehicles, must be insured as motor vehicles. In terms of what government could do, or sort of steps we've been trying to take, we've been engaging BIVA and the ABI on all of this without much coming of that. We've engaged the department on it multiple times, obviously. The Motor Insurance Task Force that is, I believe, currently sitting with submitted evidence too. The one bit of slight sort of green shoot has been some work we've been able to do with the Community Transport Association and a broker that they know who has been able to come up with some new cover in effect, which is now in action with a couple of smaller schemes, and so that is an option for some of them. That's been the one bit of good news in the last half decade plus.
And from your perspective, do you see a delta in the rate of inflation on the market and the rate of inflation of the actual cost of insurance payout within the sector?
Probably sort of quick answer is, hunch answer is yes, but we don't have any detailed figures on that. We've been trying to understand through all of this why, because the insurance sector was reasonably happy to cover car sharing historically. This isn't a new concept that's suddenly arisen in 2018-19. The best we've been able to understand is that just a general retraction as that sector seems to have lost control of its own costs and its overall loss making from anything that is not very standard mainstream large volume, regardless in my view of what the actual numbers say. So that there is no smoking gun that we've never been able to find of an enormous set of claims that the sector has made or anything like that.
Thank you very much.
The other thing that's happened in that time is the availability of day insurance for individuals.
Right.
So you can rent your own car out to friends or colleagues, and they can just pay for the insurance for the day. So you don't necessarily need a car club. You can just do it yourself. We used to have a peer-to-peer car club called Car Loco, and we pulled out of that market because of the insurance pressures, but also seeing the likes of Enterprise coming in, so individuals could insure themselves, and then the bigger providers being much more flexible about their services.
Right.
So it was squeezing at both ends.
It's potentially reducing the size of the insurance market as well.
Potentially, if individuals don't have a car but want to borrow their friend's car, they can be insured by the day.
£20 or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, and the price point is about £30 a day, I think, seem to remember, but
got it.
So one of the points to add, this affects peer-to-peer as well, as you know, Sam touched on, but GetAround were a peer-to-peer platform who were in the UK but exited, citing insurance costs as prime reason for doing that, which had leapt so much that it just wrecked the economics of it.
I suppose it's also down to the way the insurance for cars works in the UK. Rather than insuring the car, you insure the person. So I don't know exactly across Europe how it all operates, but that's why it's much easier to work in Europe, because you insure the car, not the person, and that's where cost and the risk comes in.
And it also, I assume, depends who the user is, because if you're a vehicle driver, maybe the first name driver on a current policy, or you've got no, you know, and you've got no claims, no claims hit, it's much easier to get insurance than it is if you're not a car owner, and with no valid, you know, current insurance history. So that must make a big difference as well. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. James, to kick off with you on this. We understand that Zipcar used to operate in various other places, including Bristol, Cambridge and Oxford, but have pulled out of there. What were the reasons, to the extent you were able to share those with us, and what makes an area commercially viable for an operator like yours?
Yeah, so I think we saw a big increase in cost post-pandemic, and it was harder then to manage businesses in multiple locations. So we saw more usage in London than we were seeing in the smaller markets, so made the decision to close those. It wasn't an easy decision. We had members that were using our vehicles regularly there. I hope at some point in the future we'll go back, but it was really to focus our efforts and manage our costs within London. I think in terms of what makes a good location for car sharing, there's a number of factors. I think where you've got authorities that are supportive, and they can be supportive in a number of ways. That could be free parking permits, it could be promotion. We've worked with some authorities in London where we co-fund an offer, so if residents want to join, we put some free credit in, they support it as well. And we've had some that do a parking permit scrappage scheme, so if residents have given up their private car, so they're handing back their residence parking permit, again they get an offer and credit to join a car club. So there's things like that where you know, we've got authorities that are supportive and want to do things with us. That makes it easier for us to operate there. On the flip side, we've seen other authorities putting up rates by 78% in a year, and that means we can't operate there from a cost perspective. So there's that side of things that play a role, how supportive they are. I think then from the kind of the demographics and the makeup of the location, I think we've already mentioned before, a good public transport offering, good alternative options to private car is key, and for us a good density of population. So particularly in London, there's not much off-street parking, so there's a lot of on-street parking. That's really important, because that, you know, means that people are that cost of parking is another factor that might shift somebody to use car sharing instead of their own private car, because again, from bringing the cost piece that we talked about before. So I think there's a range of factors. I think what we're seeing, because of this kind of imbalance of kind of support, as an operator, we will go to those locations where authorities are supportive. You know, we've got 5 cars, we'll put those where we'll get the best rates and best support and best potential members using them. So it's unfortunately that means it's a fragmented approach.
Okay, because I mean the cities that you used to be in are very different sizes. I mean, we're ranging from, I don't know, about 150,000 to about 500,000. Does size matter?
I don't think it does. No, I think there are many cities in the UK where car club models such as ours could work. It may be on a different scale, it may not be as many vehicles, but it can work. I think we generally, and I think Richard will update with probably better figures, but I think we generally assume between 100 to 150 members per vehicle. So as long as you've got that density, there's around that people that will use the car, you're going to get the utilisation of that vehicle, and that's a key metric. If you've got a car there that's not being used, that's an expensive asset that's kind of draining money. If you've got membership there that will use it and are using it regularly, then it's viable. And I think it's a bit chicken and egg. And that's where the things like the Section 106 that Sam mentioned is really important, because that reduces the risk as an operator. So the builders, the project developers will pay for their Section 106 to have a vehicle in there. That reduces our risk, which we can go into places that maybe we wouldn't have done because there's no membership there. So that's kind of allows us to build our presence that way.
And Richard, you've said that you think that London is a difficult market to operate in for car clubs, and you've already highlighted some of the reasons why. To what extent do you think those same reasons apply to other towns and cities across the UK?
I think there's some echo in the lack of policy support, framework, coherent plan, etc. London doesn't have one of those around car and lift sharing, nor does the UK, nor does England. And so we have the patchwork quilt aspect. So you see that within London, with different boroughs taking very different approaches. Some are very supportive, some are half and half, and some are trying to have cake and eat it in the sense of they want car club service, but they want a lot of money paying to them to have it, too much in some instances. So we're seeing reduction of service on the back of that. Where I think it's different is that London is 34 Londons within one, which is not a successful model on non-bus surface transport, and it's not one that exists anywhere else in the world really for a reason. Now, other places in the UK don't have that model, and so I think it's interesting the steps this government's taken, the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill. The rise of these combined authorities is in fact not quite actually a London model. It's more, if you like, of a Manchester or a West Midlands, etc. model, and I think that does make more sense if those authorities can then have a sensible grip and relationship with car and lift sharing in their area, albeit there's still then tensions when you come down to highway authority level. So we have this uncomfortable split axis that we achingly familiar to everyone in transport, but it really makes a big difference in car sharing as well.
Right, okay, thank you. Scott, you've got some questions.
Thank you. So James, sticking with London, so the number of EVs in your fleet is dropping, and in December I think there'll no longer be an exemption for EVs with respect to the congestion charge. So what does that mean for you as a business, and also what does it mean for your customers once you drop out of that exemption?
It's really challenging for us. We've modelled and provide data to Como UK, and for a sector in London, we think that will be about £1 million more cost per year just from having EVs in our fleet going into the congestion charge zone. And it comes back to the point before that's because we are treated the same as a private car. Our view is that we are a congestion reducing measure, car sharing generally, and therefore we should be treated differently to the private car that is a congestion causing measure. To different rules. I think what it will mean for us as a business is that will put a halt on our EV growth. That's an additional cost that we have to either absorb as a business.
Well, your growth is already halted in EVs. Yeah,
exactly. But it could even go back further. So when we come to the point of our current EVs come to the end of their life, we'll have to make a call around: do we want to purchase new EVs or purchase ICE vehicles instead? And we'll have to do at that time, a cost analysis. What's better for the business? At the moment, if nothing changes, it's likely that the £6,000 more cost per year for an EV compared to a petrol vehicle. I would be foolish to purchase an EV if it's going to cost me more of that when I'm also getting these more costs on the business as well. And it's this tension, I think I said before, that we can either absorb that as a business, but we already operate on extremely low margins, and that can be really challenging to absorb such a high amount in a year. Or we pass those costs on to members, and then we make the cost of using car sharing too expensive, and we lose members, which then becomes challenging for business as well. So it's this real tension that we have, that costs are going up across the board, and we have to kind of make tough decisions around what will our fleet look like. And unfortunately, that means, I say we've gone back already, we may have to go back further on those EVs.
So this is just purely a business issue rather than an issue that your customers might be concerned about? They're not going to be put off by using your service when they...
No, I mean, I think they would if we put our prices up significantly. We know that plays a role. All of our free floating fleet is electric, so we don't see any drop in usage there from switching from petrol to electric. We have seen it from our round trip fleet, to the point that Richard was making. I think it's more around those longer trips that members are put off from taking an electric vehicle currently for longer trips. Not all of them, but some are. We sell car sharing on it being hassle-free. And it's all the benefits of owning a car without the hassle of owning a car.
Okay.
Putting charging in or having to charge mid-trip is a hassle. And also have to remember that members are paying for that time that they're charging.
Okay.
It's a pay per use, and so that's another challenge that we have to work with.
What would you like to see happening, apart from just, is there anything else that can be done other than just continuing the exemption, anything else that would help you through this transition?
I think just more broadly, some recognition of policy for car sharing and the benefits that we bring, whether that's at government level or at London level. By having a target in place, it sets a direction, it sets a support. If we want to be at X number of car club users or X number of car club vehicles by a certain date, then policy will come in place to support that. That then potentially brings more operators into the market. I think there's a real challenge in the UK that for the large operators, probably 4 of us, and you look to somewhere like Germany, there's probably 200 operators. Why is it that operators aren't coming to the UK to operate car sharing? We want competition. That kind of it shares the risk, and it means that you bring more people into car sharing.
Yeah, it's a real challenge actually, because one version of the future is that far fewer of us will own cars, but we'll have more ready access to kind of car clubs, day to day. But as a country, we seem to be not quite moving towards that. And I think that's for a lot of people, they like the idea of owning a car, and I get that. But for a lot of us, it's just something you want to use when it's there, and otherwise, you're not too precious about it. Just on congestion charge specifically, Ali, just that. Have you ever thought about asking for pooled cars to have some sort of exemption or reduction for congestion charge, or is that just going to steal people away from public transport in London?
That is done in other parts of the world where you have hot lanes.
Just on the charge though.
But it's the point of charging a group of users. If you increase costs, people do things differently. Yeah. Carpooling is half the price of driving on your own, so automatically you're going to help people. When congestion charges came in, we didn't actually lobby for them to get a discount, partly because the technology wasn't there at the time to give it to people. It is there now. In France, they have high occupancy lanes where they are.
You think the benefits that argument's already been made and people are benefiting?
The benefits would have been there if they'd advertised carpooling as an option.
Okay.
It was up to individuals to kind of find it for themselves rather than it being a policy to encourage more occupancy.
Right, thank you. And James, earlier you were speaking about how you get a club set up in a local authority, etc. And you talked about some of the detail around the exemptions from paying parking permits and etc. So what is the ideal scenario for you to set up in an ideal town? What kind of, are you looking for an exclusive deal? Is that how it works? I mean, you talked about sometimes you pay charges. What is the ideal environment for you to operate within?
I think really what we're trying to get with authorities is flexibility. We want to grow, but committing to a new location where we're not necessarily sure what that will operate like can be challenging to invest in a vehicle, to put in a place, and it won't be utilised. So what we're trying to get more is a flexible approach. That's challenging with the current structure. So to put in a car club bay, there's lots of TMOs and consultations. It can take, from a first conversation with an authority to putting a vehicle in, up to 2 years. Yeah. And that's really difficult to plan as a business. We're going to grow in 2 years' time with these bays. Market conditions may have changed at that point. So I think speeding up would be helpful. That flexibility that allows us to try something, and have we managed to build a network of users there? Yes, no, yes, we have. Great. Let's continue and grow that. And we do that by some authorities will give us free parking permits initially. When we reach a level of utilisation that we can kind of manage as a business, then we'll start to pay permit fees at that point. So I think it's kind of different ways of working and recognising that we are a benefit to authorities. We can help them achieve their air quality decarb targets. Yeah. And there is that tension often where the air quality teams, the environmental teams want to do car sharing. And as Sam said, then the parking teams want to recoup the revenue that they've lost from giving up private parking spaces. So we have to pay excessive amounts to play, and often we're paying more than residents for parking permits. And that as a long-term measure just doesn't work for us, and we're having to kind of, as I say, go to locations and authorities that are supportive, and the result of that is you have some locations where residents have access to a wide option of car sharing, and others where there's none, and that feels unfair from an equitable access to services.
It's an interesting point about the TROs actually, the fact that does take time, and that can be a real a lot of friction, if I can use that word, on your rate of expansion. So when I lived in Edinburgh a few years ago, there's no car club spaces, and that's because the local community councils, a kind of Scottish thing, they opposed the loss of a car parking space because they thought it was a valuable community asset. The fact, even though it's very suburban, lots of space, is that kind of resistance a problem for you, both from residents and I guess also from local politicians and local authorities, about the fear of the impact, perhaps counterintuitively, it's going to have on parking availability to people who own their own cars or just perhaps want to park in an area?
I think it probably needs to begin with, when we get into the first point of putting a vehicle in somewhere, there's that risk that we're taking the residents' parking space away. What we can then point to once we've been operating for a number of months is actually within this location, these are all the members that live here. So they are using this asset. And I think that then helps to address some of those challenges as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the issue of where car club spaces are, on my patch, they're not just on the public road, they're on council car parks, I think there's some on private or retail car parks, but also as a result of Section 106 agreements, we've had them on in the perimeter of a private sector development block of flats where there's limited number of private parking for the flat residents. Do they present the same kind of problems, or is that not very frequent?
In the property development space?
Well, the property development, private car parks, council car parks.
So private ones we tend to pay more, so that's challenging in itself.
Okay. Even if it's part of a Section 106?
For Section 106, that's different.
Okay.
Because we tend to get the funding, so that's the ideal, that we get the funding, kind of reduces the risk.
The developer funds it for a fixed period?
It varies. It tends to be kind of the first year to 3 years that they'd fund it for, and that allows us to build the usage in that time.
Okay.
I think the key thing for us in choosing where we want ideal place for our vehicles is generally on street where people can see them. So we know from, I think, the last Como UK survey, 51% of members joined a car club because they'd seen it on the street. If you're in a private car park, if you're underground, it's less visible. Also, from a user perspective, going into a car park late at night, not much lighting, it's not conducive. They don't tend to work as well. So anything that's got open access for all and on the street tends to work better.
Okay. Some new developments don't look, in the way, look like part of the street, even if they're not. So.
Yeah, I think it's, again, even with property developers, what we try to say is, even if we're on private land, it's trying to be open access and not behind gates and that kind of thing. So it's trying to work out what has the most appeal and most access for as many people as possible.
Thank you, that's helpful. Alex?
Thank you. In a few places in the UK, there are high occupancy vehicle lanes to help people with more than one person in the car kind of speed through the traffic. Do you think that helps encourage car sharing and reduces congestion?
Yes.
Next.
Yes, it definitely does. The challenge has been on policing. And people who are sitting in traffic looking at a relatively empty lane. Mm-hmm. When you look at the numbers of people moving rather than vehicles moving, they make typically, if it's ideally 3 or more lanes, if you have one of those as a carpool lane, it increases the efficiency of the whole network in terms of people movements rather than just vehicle movements. In France, again, they now have around Paris, they have their high occupancy vehicle lanes, supported by cameras that for a while were advisory and then are now fining people if they only have one person in the car. The cameras have got so much better than the last few years and much more affordable. So any local authority could be introducing high occupancy vehicle lanes. They could even be considering converting some underused bus lanes into being high occupancy vehicle lanes if those lanes aren't. Again, it's looking at people movements on that corridor. The legislation went through, I think, in about 2004 to enable that to happen, but so far no local authorities have done that.
And why do you think that there's such a low uptake of this across the UK compared to some other places?
Low uptake of lanes?
Creating the lanes.
A good question. I mean, there was the M4 when it was expanded was going to be they would look at making the the bus lane into car occupancy lane, the M1, when it was coming down from Luton, that widening was put out there as being a carpool lane, and then about a month before it got introduced, the carpool lane bit got dropped. So 24 miles of carpool lane got dropped overnight. I think it's political, it's not making the clear case and not necessarily looking at the numbers. In fact, when the last lane was done, they hadn't even gone to America to look at best practice, which at the time was in America, and we were encouraging the team looking at it to learn what works and replicate it. In Washington, the last time I looked at it, they're about to double the number of carpool lanes out there because they saw it as being a policy win for them.
And do you think there's policy change, or this is to anyone, that could be made on this? For example, who gets the revenue? I mean, there is a distinct incentive to put in bus lanes because the local authority gets the revenue, whereas I don't believe that... the fines from it, yes. Whereas I don't believe that that's the case in high occupancy lanes at the moment. So would that help? And also, at the moment, I understand that basically only the police can enforce. Are there other policy changes that you'd like to see that would mean perhaps it isn't just down to the police?
Yes, I'm thinking it's probably best if I did a paper on this a while ago that I might share because it covers all those topics. But the bigger picture is looking at what the main aim is. If you start looking at modes, you have problems. I mean, we've just talked about parking, and with carpooling, if a council makes money from parking and you get two people rather than one person parking, their revenue drops. Even if the greater good might be being served, it's a reason not to do it. So you need to look at the bigger picture, and a key thing that's missing in the transport sector is the goal. Why are we all here? Are we here to reduce car miles? Are we here to reduce emissions? If we're here to reduce emissions, the easiest way to do it, to track it, is to look at the amount of fuel that's being sold at petrol stations. If you know that number, and that number's going down, you are improving emissions. If you try and do it by modelling all sorts of complicated things, it takes a time. That gives you real-time metrics on the amount of fuel being used. You can then start setting goals, rewarding local authorities who are reducing it. You can link it to population, so you're making sure it doesn't negatively impact the populations that are growing. It's a really simple metric that if everyone was going for, would give clarity. So when you look at which mode to do, whether a bus lane, a carpool lane, a car club, it gives you a reason to introduce it of an environmental reason. If you look at road miles, it's the same thing. What do these initiatives do that's going to get you to that goal? At the moment, the sector doesn't have anything like this, and so it's all very siloed.
Take an example of that. National Highways has no remit to focus on number of people as opposed to number of vehicles. They are set to look at it's free choice. You rock up in whatever metal box you rock up in, or whatever other device, and it is their job, loosely speaking, to provide some space for you to do that, however inefficiently you have done that.
Unless you're carrying goods.
Yes.
Commercially.
But if they're, plus rate, absolutely. But if their remit was reset to focus instead on efficiency, for sure, you'd see a different approach, you'd see different priorities, and something like high occupancy lanes would suddenly become very interesting because it would be a tool to get you to that greater efficiency. And I think
the bus operators would love that.
The wider financial, fiscal, economic impacts of that are profound. If you look at the amount of money the government spends on road building every year, we could be in a world where we are turning away from additional capacity into making best use of existing capacity, then we start to talk very big financial numbers apart from anything else. I think just also to add on the parking revenue tail wagging the policy practice dog, I mean, this is something we butt up against all day, every day. It's an enormous factor in local authority decision making, and the tussle between the departments within the authority is something we're all at this table achingly familiar with. It's it really has an impact. I also want, if I might, just go back to section 106 just briefly, in that it can be a really valuable tool, section 75 in Scotland, community infrastructure levy in London, but it needs to be done right. And so just there have been some big examples of, it's done in a very tokenistic way. The car club car rocks up as the development build out is finishing, so everyone's made their choices. It's not promoted, it's not in a prominent place. The moment the funding is gone, the car club car goes because the viability for it wasn't built. There's the much more positive version of doing it all well, as we were saying earlier, but it's really important that any policy in this space, if we ever could get any coherent kind, would focus on what works side of that.
Okay, thank you. Ollie?
Thank you, Chair. Up to now, our discussion has mostly been focused on cities, either medium-sized, Oxford, Cambridge, or large, like London. But the UK's got many constituencies like mine in Oxfordshire, which is basically it's 3 towns of differing sizes and then a whole load of villages and rural areas. So how commercially viable do you feel car clubs have the potential to be in rural areas or smaller towns and cities?
So best thing to do is, within your constituency, look how many fleet vehicles the council has, how many pool cars the council has, how many vehicles they have that aren't used in an evening, aren't used on a weekend. All them vehicles can become car club vehicles without us putting in, Zipcar putting in 100 vehicles, Enterprise putting 100 vehicles, Hire Car putting 100 vehicles. The vehicles are already there. The council has all the vehicles. You'll have 100, 150, 200 vehicles. Each local authority is completely different in the way they operate fleet. But all them vehicles, our demand is shown that evenings and weekends are when car sharing is the highest demand. Same for most operators, I'd say. And that's probably the most low demand and low utilisation of organisations' fleet vehicles, NHS fleet vehicles, local authority fleet vehicles. And the good thing is, talk about revenue loss, that's all fresh revenue for a local authority or NHS trust or business. Them vehicles were sat idle, not being used. On our model, we give you back 100% of the revenue from all of your bookings. You get to set your rates. If you want a car to be £1 an hour to encourage car sharing in your area, your vehicles, you set the rates, you take the revenue. So that's the best way to, for me, in areas outside where standard operators can't operate, is use your existing assets local authorities already have. We're seeing Lancaster Council, East Lothian Council, Tower Hamlets Council are making more revenue than us on their vehicles that they're sharing out with. So, and Lancaster covers Lancaster and Morecambe, so not exactly a massive city like Tower Hamlets is in the middle of London. East Lothian are doing really well. They've got a lot of tourists using it actually in East Lothian. Doing a similar project with East Ayrshire Council as well up in Scotland. East Lothian was funded by Transport Scotland, which was helpful. But more and more local authorities are looking to use their existing assets as car clubs. One, they don't have to. You can use existing sites, existing assets, no outlay for them in regards to cost other than a monthly tech cost, which is very minimal compared to a vehicle lease or anything like that. You keep all the revenue and you're doing good for the community, providing sustainable transport options, which weren't otherwise there. So that's rurally, that's how I'd say is the best way to do it.
Intriguing idea, yeah.
Sorry. So to add to all those very good points, I think there's the role of the community scale volunteer-led schemes that we see. There's also housing developments which can be relevant in more rural areas where you're getting big edge-of-envelope developments going in. Particularly interesting are those which are big enough to make the weather, if you like. We're talking about multiple hundreds or into thousands of homes. The policy picture here is very difficult also, sadly, really. The spatial planning system doesn't understand car sharing, doesn't facilitate it specifically. National Planning Policy Framework doesn't mention it. We keep on harping away at MHCLG about this. So you're pushing water uphill if you're doing the planning application to do this stuff well, sadly, whereas it should be the other way around. But nonetheless, there's some potential there, I think. I think, to answer your question of, in effect, how viable is it? It's mixed, and I think some of it just won't be commercially viable for car club. Some of it won't be even viable for peer-to-peer in some instances. But the interesting bit to think about then, I think, is, okay, but is that necessarily the end of the story? Because in public transport, we don't accept that point. We accept that some bits of the public transport network be net revenue generating and other bits will be loss making, but there's a societal reason why we think that's a good thing to put subsidy into. Any subsidy needed for these sorts of schemes would be absolute pennies compared to what is spent on public transport subsidy. So I think it'll be very interesting to see where government goes on this. We would like them to go somewhere progressive and think about this, particularly around these transport settlements or integrated transport settlements, or whatever they're going to be called, for these new authorities to be created by the English Devolution Bill. What is it that they're going to be empowered to do with regards to car sharing, if anything, is an absolutely key, potential opportunity avenue, I think. Oxfordshire actually has lots of interesting stuff going on. The County Council is up to quite a lot and has been for a while. There's quite a few lively community schemes there as well. So it's actually a bit of a hotbed of experimenting with this sort of semi-rural market town, larger village, sort of densities.
And with electric vehicles as well.
And absolutely with a big role for EVs. Yeah.
I think what I might add is, I can, without going into major detail, I could tell you the commercial model of a car club and our costs. You've got the holding cost of a vehicle, you've got the parking permit cost, you've got the cost of PCNs and damages which you can't recover from the driver when vehicles are damaged. Sometimes we can recover them, not every time we can recover them. If we're going outside of London, we might have extra maintenance staff costs, so valeters, engineers, people who prep the vehicles, put the vehicles back on charge. Any marketing costs we might need, insurance costs of the vehicles. When you slowly factor all them creeping costs in, that doesn't include platform costs, back-end staff support costs, sales costs, all of them extra costs. You're working on minuscule margins. To be able to say, we'll put a vehicle in for 12 months and that vehicle could lose X amount of money for them 12 months it's a massive risk, and I think our appetite for risk has just slowly over the years decreased, unfortunately, to go into new areas, because it's just, we don't understand. We can understand certain levels of demand, but it's not always guaranteed, and we need London offers guaranteed demand in certain areas. Going into different areas, we're not guaranteed that demand. We're not a big enough company to be able to take them risks, unfortunately, and that's what it boils down to. Some areas we get funding for funded car clubs, and then we can understand the demand. We've done the marketing, and we can put half match funding for these car club vehicles. Then we might be able to gain a driver base, and that driver base sort of expands and demand sort of increases. Then after 2 to 3 years, then we can say, right, we've proven that model on 10 vehicles that's part funded by the local authority. Let's put another 10 vehicles in at our cost, because now we understand the risk, we understand the demand levels, and all that sort of stuff. So that's where it sort of comes down to it, unfortunately.
Thank you, that's interesting. Baggy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions around public perception and trust in the various schemes. What are the common reasons why people still remain reluctant to car share, carpool, lift sharing, whatever we're calling it?
I'll take that to begin with, if that's okay. I think from a car club perspective, a lot of it is just around visibility. If you ask the general population, do you know what a car club is, they'd probably say no, unless they live in a location where there's a car club on their street. Yeah. I think, as I said before, nearly half of members that join because they've seen one. So if you don't see one, you don't know what it is. So I think we can grow perception by having more provision of car clubs. Certainly when members use it, satisfaction levels are extremely high and consistently high across the sector.
Yes, that's true. 80% satisfaction level is an average finding for us over the previous X years. It's very consistent. The challenge, I think, is much more around getting people to know what they are and give it a go in particular. It's one thing, hypothetically, knowing that that's some kind of car somebody can access somehow, and it's another thing having given it a go. Generally speaking, once people have given it a go, they really like it. But I think it points to another policy failure of the lack of promotion. And the word defined broadly, it's mostly left up to operators to actually promote in any way the service. That inevitably lands with people as advertising, which on one level is what it is. There's a real dearth of activity from governments, large and small here, to get across the point that this option's available. Then this is where the toolkits from DFT with better socialisation could have been playing a role. This is how you go about it. So there's a lot of barriers to clamber over there which perhaps needn't be there.
And do we see these same problems outside of the UK? Or is this?
It's a common, it's a standing problem, because everywhere to some extent has the default that by the word car we mean a car that someone has sole access to, whether they're owning it or leasing it. But if you look at the high-performing areas like Belgium, for example, it's so well embedded in policy at local and national level, and it has been for a number of years, Germany, similar story, that there's an awareness among the general population that reflects that policy in effect. So because those local, regional, national authorities and employers and other actors have been at this for a good while, it becomes an expected part of the fabric, and so awareness levels are above what they are here. We're in a much more ad hoc patchwork quilt landscape.
From a carpooling point of view, public perception is, it depends whether you're about informal or formal. Lots of people informally carpool without thinking about it. In terms of actually joining up with a scheme, whenever we start working with a client, we ask whether they'd be willing to carpool to work. And typically 50 to 60% of people say they would. That means 40 to 50 won't. But that's a large proportion compared to typically about 20% by bus. So it's a bigger number of people would consider going by carpooling, but then why don't they? And it's the perception of convenience, it's the perception of losing your ability to get home on time, all those things. Once people start carpooling, their perception changes overnight and they keep doing it. The drop-off rate for people who start carpooling is very low because they realise it's cheaper, greener, more fun, easier, less, for all many reasons, but it's trying to get people to try it the first time, which is why, again, when we look at France and they're priming that market by incentivising people to either have 1 trip or 10 trips, once you've shared a car with someone for 10 trips, you're going to keep doing it because it's cheaper. But you need to give them a reason to give it a try. And once you give it a try, same with car clubs, once you give it a try, you realise it's better. You've then got to decide at what point you're going to get rid of your second car or not buy your next car. And that can be a longer term thing, but in the short term, it's getting people to try these modes that is the key thing.
And in practical terms, then, how can we overcome these barriers? I know you mentioned government involvement, but surely the answer isn't, or the problem isn't the governments every time. How do we work together to overcome the barriers?
I think the low-hanging fruit would be to remove the second, the third car a family has. So, yes, they might still need 1 car. First target the second car and the third car that they might. The easiest ones to get away from. So have 1 vehicle you need, and then share when you need a second vehicle. That's what my perspective would be in regards to culture change. But yeah, it's hard to put a nail on the head in regards to, like you said, can't just always be a government needs to fix this issue. It's down to culture change. We built a country, and this is transport in general, built a country that became car reliant, and now we're trying to go back to public transport and more sustainable transport modes. So it's ingraining that from all the way through from education in regards to schools and how we transport, and that's the same around public transport really, to then educate the majority of the public through different marketing schemes, again from operators but from government, throughout sort of from, like I said, education age to 60, 70, 80 plus year olds who won't be used to using apps and stuff like that in regards to accessing vehicles and just use their car. I'd say it's an education piece of culture really.
Any others?
Maybe we need to bring back James Corden and Carpool Karaoke and Peter Kay's series, because they've been a while since they've been on telly. So
I think it's on a level of ambition as well. I think we lack ambition around shared transport in the UK at present, and I think that having that ambition, it would attract potentially new operators into the market. It would give that impetus for growth. Showing that as Sam said, that confidence you can go somewhere and there's support and there's an ambition, there's a target to work towards and work together. And I think it's working together. We want to invest in marketing, explaining to members and potential members what car sharing is. We also want to do that in a framework that we know that actually there is a long-term growth potential in the place that we're going to.
I do think there's an important role for government, but I don't think it's a sole role. It's government in collaboration with providers, with lots of other actors too, with other parts of the public sector locally, with the third sector, with companies, employers. It should be a team effort, but I think to run it well, there needs to be a team effort on an agreed basis with some incentives that help. Car clubs are typically now paying in London 10 times the residential parking permit fee per space. One borough's had a go at taking it up to 30 times. So the messaging is very clear there on the economic front, isn't it? And then that translates straight through into level of provision, which then translates into level of awareness.
Contradictory policies.
Going back to concerns, sorry.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Just going back to concerns, are there particular concerns for obvious reasons that you hear from women in particular?
Well, you do mention that. So we're running a trial with a certain NHS trust in London at the moment, more around corporate car sharing, and our platform uses an app to unlock vehicles and lock the vehicle, and it allows you to start the vehicle and all that sort of stuff. So you use the app. You have to get your phone out to be able to unlock the car. I don't know if Zipcar use an app as well.
Yeah.
Well, you can use an RFID card, but mainly it's all app based. And nurses there are saying, well, we've got a community visit at 8 o'clock in winter. I'm having to go out into the road, get my phone out, and then unlock the car. It becomes a challenge, and they say, why can't we just use the key? So that reduces the ability to corporate car share. But it's the same angle for car clubs. I mean, I think you've done more studies on women and vulnerable people in regards to accessing car clubs. But yeah, that's from a corporate car sharing perspective. We're still getting that pushback that they're having to get the phone. I mean, on the news every day now you hear about phone snatching in London and stuff like that, and that's the same sort of aspect. Exactly. So yeah, it is a challenge, and that's a specific case around women nurses for this trust that we're trying to overcome that with using RFID cards rather than phones and stuff like that.
Just on the barriers, I mean, all of these sectors run on shoestrings. So we don't charge our members for sharing a car. It's up to them to split the cost. So we do our marketing basically for free from our profits from our corporate clients. The challenge is you're going up against other things. You're not only going up against car manufacturers doing all their advertising, taking BSIP. BSIP has done wonders for buses. It's got more people back on buses, which has been great. But there's been no BSIP for carpooling. So we are competing in a world where some modes of transport, whether they're better or not or similar to carpooling, are funded, and there's no funding or awareness for what we're doing. There's no legislation, there's no goal, there's no target. So when we're working with local authorities, when there's no funding or an equal level of funding, no particular targets, they chose carpooling amongst a range of options. Now there's funding for buses, the councils go for buses, or cycling, they'll go for buses. They've all dropped their carpool teams or anyone responsible for it. We've also seen the biggest change for us was when Scope 3 got made voluntary and commuting got put in Scope 3 along with business travel. Commuting should be a business cost. Businesses decide how their staff commute or where they place their businesses. Because it's Scope 3 and voluntary, when all the legislation came in for companies to start reporting their emissions, none of them included commuting. So commuting, the teams, their environmental teams, stopped focusing on this one area that they can have quite a big impact on. So for the last 10 years, nothing has happened. Along comes a pandemic and companies start realising they can focus on commuting, and suddenly they start changing the commuting habits of their staff. If commuting and business miles were mandatorily reported by large companies, it would impact all of us, because it gives them a reason to start realising just how beneficial for the environment car sharing and carpooling are for their organisations.
I mean, you've also got the new plug-in EV car grant that's come out for £1,500 up to £3,500 to buy a new electric vehicle. There's no grant on to say don't buy a new electric vehicle, share an electric vehicle. Buy one for the street and everyone share it, or 2 or 3 households share it. But it's encouraging people to go buy and lease a new car, embodied carbon, new vehicle on the road.
On the personal safety issue and lift sharing, is there any evidence that women are reluctant to sign up?
And our members align with population numbers, so we're exactly male, female, and actually more women end up sharing than men, because often they're the ones that don't have the car at home because the man might have taken it.
Okay, Scott.
Now, I was going to ask this question earlier, but I managed to stop myself. You talked about a street owner in a car there. As someone I know, he does co-own a car with somebody else in his street, and it seems to work for them, you know. But I wonder, so this is a bit niche, is there any barriers to people doing that in terms of co-owning a car?
No, so we do operate a scheme in Oxfordshire actually called Closed Loop. So rather than people sharing the vehicle out with everyone on the hire car platform, you can have a closed loop, so where you own the car and you have a sign-up link and you can distribute that to your neighbours or on your estate or the block of flats that you live, and only then people in that closed loop can then share the vehicle. That does withdraw some of the barriers, because you know people are using it, it's your local community, you're not as worried about people getting in your car and going on a joyride and smashing it up. So yeah, the closed loops do work quite effectively, but there's not enough of them. We've not been able to sort of get enough people to create them.
Well, there's probably a lot of people like me, who co-share running a car with our friends and neighbours who live in the same road, but there's no stats for that because it's a completely informal arrangement made up based on trust and so on. So, okay, thank you. We're now going to go back to the areas that you've touched on a lot. So, new things to say, please, on policy, starting with government. So what engagement have you had with government, and has it just been with the DfT, if at all? I'll go to Richard because you've picked up on this.
I start, yes. The DfT mainly, as you would expect, but very limited, as I was relaying earlier. I won't go over all of that. MHCLG also, because of the importance of spatial planning done right, that I was referring to before. Treasury, we have had a couple of meetings with. There are various pieces of tax discrimination against car sharing, benefit in kind rules, for example. The department is now called DESNS, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, a little, and DEFRA a little on air quality. And we, in an optimal world, will be talking to DHSC, but we haven't gone there yet because we're a bit tied up with trying to get some traction with the more mainstream bits of Whitehall. And then we engage very regularly, it's worth saying, with local authorities up and down the country, typically engaging about 40 of those per month.
Thank you. Any other contact with government departments, effective or not?
We have had many, to the point where up until today I haven't been in the last few years because I'd given up.
Oh, right. Okay.
We've had lots of very positive discussions, lots of support, often from the shadow team as well as from the central team. We've seen a lot.
When you mean shadow, you mean the opposition party?
The opposition, they get it, but then when they get into power, they often suddenly don't.
That's a current situation.
No, I'd say it's actually it's flat. But we've had lots of very positive discussions. The thing that has been asked for by us and other providers and Como for years is demonstrator towns, specifically on carpooling. They've been very close to happening several times, never happened, and then we're told there's no evidence to show this works. It's like, just within a year we could show it working at scale. That's frustrating. And we've encouraged trips to France or to Europe to say why are they doing what they're doing and what's working. That needs to happen here because we could replicate that best practice so quickly, and the relative sums of money being invested. You might think 150 million euros is a lot compared to their 30 billion transport budget. It's nothing, and it can deliver impacts far quicker, and the public like it. It's it's one of the few things you can do in transport that actually the public want you to be doing.
Okay.
Yeah, generally not. I mean, I think part of the challenge is knowing who to speak to because nobody is responsible for it. So that's the.
NHS England, for the NHS Net Zero Travel and Transport Strategy, actually included something around pool cars and corporate car sharing within their Net Zero Travel and Transport Strategy. I did previously work in the NHS as a transport manager, so I knew who to speak to, which might have helped a little bit. Local authorities, again, the issue with when on a local level in
we're coming back to local. I just wanted to pick up on
central
government.
Nothing.
No,
really.
okay.
On central government, on the greening government commitments side, that I believe it's been paused several times, but it's going to be republished in March, and we hope that there might be more on these sort of things within that. But again, it's been delayed.
Did you still have a question, Ollie, or is it covered? No. Okay. Baggy. No, sorry, Steph.
Yes, right. We heard, and you said about the withdrawal of the guidance in May this year. Any idea what's behind that? Nope.
Did you ask? Didn't get an answer.
Right. No indication of what's going to happen next?
No.
Okay.
I think it was ineffective. I don't think any local authorities knew it was actually there,
right,
or had any reason to read it or do anything about it. So maybe it could be relaunched with some support. I don't know.
Rather answers my next question, which is, was it useful?
Hardly at all, I think, from all our observations. But I think, to be fair to it, it was both were reasonable stabs at the task. But simply placing a toolkit on gov.uk doesn't change the world. What you need is to push it and to think about all the ramifications of it, and all of these points that we've been making. That didn't happen. It was very much we've put a toolkit out. That's the end of our role here.
It was the only thing in the transport decarbonisation plan in our bit that did happen. So that was a tip. Like something happened. Yeah. But it was the only thing.
I'd say the Crown Commercial Service frameworks have actually been more sort of informative and powerful for local authorities, public sector, than the actual toolkit itself. Okay.
And we've got the integrated transport strategy stuff happening. This feels like a rather big question, so let's talk about in terms of the first steps rather than how would you integrate car sharing into transport networks. But what would be the first steps that you would each take to integrate car sharing of all the types you represent into an integrated transport strategy?
I could look at this from a local level. So we do integrated transport strategies for our clients under the Mobilityways banner, where rather than taking a modal approach, we take a demand approach. We look at how members of staff going to hospital travel, how they could travel, how they want to travel, and then we work with operators and with LiftShare to then provide a suite of solutions that match their needs. And that drives up walking, cycling, bus, train, taxi sharing, DRT, everything rapidly.
It's ecosystem-led,
it's data,
user journey focused.
Personal data. So it's asking individuals, not just a random survey, asking an individual, do they want it? Are they happy to be contacted by a bus provider offering discounts? Getting the bus operators in to say, here is the demand, the lift sharing scheme to match people up, and doing it that way. At the moment, the plan, the survey didn't even mention carpooling. It didn't ask people if they shared. So it's being based on, I'd be very surprised if without something like this, it even included mention of carpooling as a mode.
Got it. Thank you. Sam?
I think Ali's right, because there's no point people car sharing and just using a car club vehicle to then drive to work, sit in an office for 9 hours and the car sit there for 9 hours and then drive it back. There's generally no point to a car club or car sharing for that. So lift share to work in a car shared vehicle, and or on some of your journeys use public transport. It has to be integrated into everything. So we do find success of having car club vehicles at train stations. So sort of that final mile journey, the same as the way you'd use public transport as well. So having that integrated into the last mile, final mile, and then where connections aren't made to public transport for longer journeys sort of helps as well.
Richard, first steps?
Yes, I could spend the rest of the day talking about this.
Yeah,
Just do first steps. I think it's a question of depth and breadth. So great opportunity coming up in the National Integrated Transport Strategy, clearly, to have a serious role for shared. And of course, we work on shared on two wheels as well, so we want to see that also. And again, these things heavily interrelate. Car club users use shared bikes and shared scooters a lot. So that strategy is the first test, I think. If it's not in there in a substantive way, then that's going to be disappointing and problematic. And I think being in there means an understanding and a commitment from DFT to work with these sectors in a long-term established way, so it does become somebody's job. There is somebody to actually engage with. It is a minister's remit in part, etc. But also breadth. So even just within DFT, there's huge opportunity here. If you look at what it's trying to do with Great British Railways, in our view, it has to think of the passenger not as somebody who just evaporates when they go beyond the gate line, but as somebody who's then going to go somewhere. And the question is, how are they going to go somewhere, and how did they get to the train in the first place? Shared has a really material role here, but long story short, there's very little direct provision of shared transport options, including four-wheeled variants, at rail stations currently. It is a massive missed opportunity. So there's a fairly large number of howling great gaps which leap off the page if you're someone like me. We mentioned National Highways already, looking at their remit and efficiency points around that. We've got aviation. This government seems minded to expand aviation significantly. If that is to happen, then there are to be some mode share targets around that, or there certainly should be. Then why are we not focusing on airports and the role of shared transport at them? So there's a big job within DFT to make it connect up with itself. Then there's, I think, the more ambitious layer of the onion, which is the NHS, DHSC, MHCLG and spatial planning policy, the Treasury and tax, etc.
A lot of silos.
Nothing but, really.
James, your first step.
For me, Bill and what Rich said, it's about having that goal, that target. Kind of what do we want trips to look like. And I think not looking at it as a siloed mode of transport, but the broad, how do you want people to get around? Yeah. That starts that conversation of, could this be done another way, rather than this is a bus trip, this is a car trip, this is a train trip, and actually thinking about how they come together, and from that setting those targets. I think once you have targets, they filter down to regional level, to local level, and that then you start having different types of conversations.
Very much.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, Ollie, back to local authorities.
Yes, you gave some good stuff on this in one of your previous answers. But what more can local authorities do to support the different forms of car sharing? Perhaps Nick, my honourable friend's way of doing this. What would be the sort of number one useful first step that local authorities could do to help?
Have someone responsible for it. Because sometimes you're talking to a parking manager, sometimes you talk to a fleet manager, sometimes you talk to a transport manager, sometimes you talk to a sustainability manager, sometimes it falls within HR. So have someone responsible for it who can then
and then there's the regeneration and the planning officers,
exactly,
and so on as well.
So yeah, have someone responsible for it who understands how it works, or is willing to understand how it works, and every operator is willing to educate how car sharing works and car clubs work. And then you can move from there with projects, whether they're funded, whether they're not funded, however you want to do it, the local authority wants to do it. But having that designated person who's responsible for it, again, it's the same way as in what you said about central government, and knowing who to talk to is the key part, and having someone who actually understands it as part of their remit is key, I'd say.
Okay.
I think I would go for finances. Set the goalposts on the right bit of the pitch, look at how much is charged to private cars, look at how much, if anything, is charged to shared cars. The answer's multiple, but as you ask for one single thing, that's my answer.
Mine would be some form of measurement. I can only think of one local authority in the entire country who knows their carpooling levels year on year and tracks it.
Which is?
Norfolk. Although they've just run out of funding to I think that last year, maybe the last year they do it. If you don't know what you're tracking, you don't really have a way to do anything about it.
Yeah. Lee, good practice.
You gave some examples earlier of local authorities that already do some of these things well. Do you have any others, whether both UK and abroad, that we should be looking at?
I think in UK terms we've seen, I mentioned before, the metro areas generally, with the exception of London, have come up on the way on this. The future transport zones I would point to as well as being a really interesting example of central and local government hybrid, and I think they've generally proved to work well, and I've seen those areas, not all of them, but most of them, able to take a much more serious focus and set of steps on this than they were before. That's been palpable if you sit in my chair. Going internationally, there's a number of city and regional authorities. Bremen have already instanced, that's the sort of originator of mobility hubs, which bring together shared transport, public transport, active travel. They have a long track record on car sharing as well. I think the basic point from those sorts of places is that, Ali's touched on this a lot with carpooling policies in more forward-stepping countries on that agenda. You do something serious rather than just playing around with it, and then you keep on at it. And you need to iterate and innovate as you go along, because the world changes and you have some impact and you want to grab that and move on, etc. But the keeping on at it bit in a serious way, that's the characteristic that I think all really successful places have on this.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Alex.
I was wondering what engagement you'd had with MCAs and mayors, and whether it was clear who you were meant to be speaking to. It's clearly unclear in government who you're meant to be speaking to. Is it clear at a regional level?
Maybe if I'll answer that first and then shush. I think in government it's unclear, it's just there is no one to speak to, which is a different version of the same point. In MCAs it's a good question. It's mixed. So I think we come here again to this opportunity in my mind around the English Devolution Community Empowerment Bill. Just what is it that these combined authorities, the whole of England is to have, are going to be looking at in terms of transport? Because although they're actually relatively similar in setup in lots and lots of ways, they're very different when you get under the skin as to how where things like shared sit in their hierarchy, perhaps more than you'd like to see. And I think we're all sort of finding our way through how is this actually meant to work. The question touched on a bit of a nerve, I think, actually, as to actually how is this meant to go, because historically these setups haven't been there in the 20th century. It's such a centralised power century for English local government. So I think there's a job of work there, guidance around the bill, the structures, who's in what job. So the bill's important to us for bike share reasons, of course, with licensing, but we'll also be working intensively on this aspect of trying to get the profile of shared there into these transport settlements and how we engage with those authorities.
Just on the previous question in terms of local authorities and in regional, when you look overseas, so in Italy, every company that employs over 200 people has to report their commuting emissions to the council, and all the councils have to report their overall commuting emissions up to the central government. So they have real stats of what's happening at a company, regional and national level. And the same is happening now in Holland, where everyone with over 200 people has to in Italy they have a mobility manager, in Holland they just have to report it. So when you've got that level of policy, it's then up to them to act on that policy and to make changes that suit what's going on nationally. So if you're trying to, again, cut emissions, you can use that data for that purpose. But they had to change the law to make employers be able to incentivise people to travel more sustainably to work. In America, you can subsidise commuting. In Holland, you can subsidise commuting. In this country, you can't provide subsidy for commuting unless it's taxed.
You are right there. It has to be backed up by policy, because in the NHS in Scotland, they have to report on every single grey fleet mile they do across every single health board. That's it. They report it. Doesn't mean they have to do anything. The biggest NHS trust in Scotland has, I think it's about 4.5 million grey fleet miles, which is ginormous compared to many organisations, but they just report it. There's nothing they do about it. So having that backed with policy is sort of key, really.
I think at regional and local level, it's easy to identify who you need to speak to, and I think we've got good relationships there. I think we're often at the whim of that individual, though, that if they leave and move on to another local authority, there's not that depth or broad understanding of car share, and often you're back to square one. So you could spend 2 or 3 years trying to build and explain car share, and they move on, and you know, and I think that's kind of links into what we've been saying around kind of broader policy and that kind of connected policy. I think it's lacking. That means we are kind of prone to that.
Policy and data.
Yeah.
Thank you. Did you? No. Okay. That brings us to the end of our session. It's been hugely informative and interesting, and particularly in what appears to be somewhat of a vacuum in terms of policy at national, regional and local levels, or local level inconsistencies. So that's been very, very useful. So thank you very much for coming to give evidence to us today. Do feel free to write to us if there's anything you think you would like to cover a bit more that you haven't been able to cover in your answers this morning, although your answers have all been very full and as I say, informative. So this concludes today's meeting. Order.